That means that all of the cuts have to be borne by the other creditors and stakeholders rather than the bondholders in the bankrupt context. And that's indeed what happened in Central Falls. One of the troubling things to me about the Central Falls resolution is that through Senator Crowley and others, the General Assembly decided to make it up on the state level, some of the cuts that took place, to the point where now the pensioners, I think, are getting 75% of what they were getting previously instead of 50% or less. That's troubling to me because that's a precedent that I think is unsustainable in other contexts. We've got Woonsocket, we've got West Warwick, Providence, and other communities that are reeling and in some cases circling the drain. And you don't want a precedent where the state taxpayers as a whole have to come in and bail out the cities. That's not a good resolution in my judgment. So as hard as it was, and let's remember, some of these pensioners the average age of the pensioner in Central Falls was 48. Right. These are people that are retiring after 20 years, taking other jobs, having dual incomes, going out on disability for things like high blood pressure and stress. It was just a totally abusive situation. Anybody thinks that's limited to Central Falls is crazy. That's endemic, and it needs to be straightened out on a municipal basis across Rhode Island to fix this problem.
And I'll point out, this is the opinion of me, not our guest. There's constant reference made to individual retirees of Central Falls as quote-unquote victims. It's the opinion of your host that particularly in a small, constrained, confined municipal environment like Central Falls, I see no victims. I like to joke, and I probably shouldn't, maybe a little gallows humor, but I missed the episode where individual members of the Central Falls municipal community chained themselves to the town hall and said, stop wasting this money, Mayor Moreau. Stop these board ups where we're getting all sorts of overtime. Stop the waste, stop the overtime. I don't see that. So I see no victims. I see people who are enablers. I see people who are contributing to the situation because of their own personal situations. I refuse to accept that all of these folks are completely blameless. There is no tradition, at least in Central Falls or for what I can see in Providence, of whistleblowing or of really any independent municipal spirit of people doing things, God forbid, in the spirit as a libertarian, in the spirit of voluntarism, or God forbid, doing it for the sake of just doing it for the right reason. It's astonishing to me. Let's talk process now. We're all aware, and some of the great conversation when you host a radio show is what happens off air. We were talking about some of the political infighting that goes on. I live in Cumberland. Woonsocket, it seems to be a primary example where the mayor is already, the new mayor, I should say, is already trying to get the state board out of the city's business. To me, it smacks of nothing more than a power grab. But at what point in time does Providence either get triggered into or announce they want to enter bankruptcy under the current procedure?
Well, under the current procedure, as I said earlier, you need the state to acquiesce and authorize any such filing. So that can happen one of two ways. It can happen when the city fathers or politicians request it, which is what happened in Central Falls. Moreau and company actually requested a receiver. Right. Things got so bad. Or the state can look at the finances and say, "This is not working. You haven't given us the numbers. It's not feasible," and they can intervene and unilaterally. And that's been done in Woonsocket and also in the Coventry Fire District that currently has a receiver appointed. So it can happen one of two ways, but in the end, the state has to authorize it by appointing a receiver. Once a receiver is appointed, then it's up to the receiver in consultation with the state officials to decide whether the situation is grievous enough to warrant a Chapter 9 filing. But once the receiver is appointed, the dynamic changes because now they know, the stakeholders and creditors know that there's a fellow in there who's holding a very big stick, and so it often produces agreements that you couldn't reach otherwise. And by the way, in Central Falls, there was no cram down here. This was all done by agreement. Once we pulled that Chapter 9 trigger, we were able to reach agreements with every constituency, including the retirees. So anybody thinks that they were forced to take this by a judge is missing the point. It was all negotiated, but it was negotiated in a context where everyone knew that they had no arguments to make about breach of contract or any of that stuff that is now clogging our courts. It's all about what can the city afford. And as long as the city is transparent about its finances and doesn't say my way or the highway, says, look, we're willing to talk to you, we're willing to hear what your ideas were. And we got some great ideas from some of the unions in Central Falls. But it turned into a negotiated deal, which is what's happening in Detroit. Because once you're in this process, it's a lot easier to reach agreements because you're holding that very big stick and you have all the cards as the municipality instead of having to plead and beg for concessions in other contexts.
At any time during the process, I'll jump in a second, but just food for thought. You had what seemed to be a fairly cooperative, pretty quick exit from bankruptcy by municipal or even by corporate standards with Central Falls. Yet at the same time, you had this handful of politicians trying to poison the well with a lot of bitter rhetoric. On a personal level, does that bother you?
Yes, because it's clear that this is sour grapes by these folks who were ineffectual when they had the ability to affect this situation. And now that a receiver comes in and the argument is this is undemocratic, this is some dictator from outside of our city coming in and we don't like it, and the law allows the receiver to really succeed to all the powers of the politicians, and they resent this bitterly. So sure, but it's a short-term fix for a problem. If you've got cancer, sometimes you're going to need radiation and chemotherapy. It may not be pleasant, but sometimes it's effective. So, the idea that the politicians are squealing. The hardest problem in Central Falls was not restructuring the city. The hardest problem was dealing with the political fallout and the end runs that were being made to the General Assembly and the governor by the politicians whose ox was getting gored and their friends were getting laid off that they had put into employment positions.
Mike, you had a question?
Yeah, reference was made to the revenue director. Would that be Galogly now?
Yes.
Who would make that? And Galogly is appointed by the governor?
Correct.
So the next governor doesn't necessarily have to go on that path?
Correct.
Okay.
This is a political question, so I'll just kind of throw this out to all of you. It would appear that Gina Raimondo, there's a great possibility she'll be our next governor. I know Dan might object, but the polls, the tea leaves at this point, would indicate that. Do you think that in a highly democratic regime at the state level, there will be an appetite to promote bankruptcy at any of these municipalities, particularly if any of these exogenous events blow up in our face?
I haven't spoken with Mr. Healy, but I've spoken with both Mrs. Raimondo and Mayor Fung. They both understand the Providence situation very well. I don't think either of them will object to us pushing ahead in that matter in that fashion. And Gina Raimondo is a resident of Providence, remember.
Right. So Gina Unleashed as treasurer sought aggressively to work out pension reforms. Gina Unleashed as governor, no fears, no qualms there?
I don't think there'll be any qualms with her moving ahead that way. I think she realizes that Providence has got to get its house straightened out. I mean, they've topped off a little bit in Central Falls. We're looking at with $1 billion problem with our pension fund. Never mind with the fact that we need $1 billion in our schools just to make them safe. Just to make them safe for the students, we need $1 billion in our schools over the course of the next 10 years. There is no way Providence can have the cash flow to do that and maintain city services.
And so the question, of course, then comes in this era of continued uncertainty. Mike, we've only got a few seconds, but is it possible at this point for Providence to go to the borrowing well with this kind of cloud hanging over our head?
Well, I don't know if I'm breaking any news or not, but I'm reading over the old investment meetings of Providence. Buddy Cianci, on 3 separate occasions, had strong fights with the Assembly about getting pension obligation bonds for Providence. I wouldn't be surprised if he was thinking that way at all. I think that's a very bad way out. I think the correct way is to satisfy the contracts so that they make sense long term, and that happens through receivership.
Well, you are listening to the Coalition on AM Talk Radio, 790, your source for news and business. You can see us on Twitter at Coalition_radio. the summit, the bankruptcy discussion, the frank analysis of the views will continue right after this break. We'll be right back.
Attention gardeners, farmers, growers, homesteaders, and horticulturalists. Coming soon to 1889 Post Road in Warwick, Rhode Island, it's The Grow Store. For all your indoor gardening supplies, it's The Grow Store. Mike's Professional Tree Service offers top-of-the-line tree removal, trimming, stump grinding, stump removal, and so much more. Mike's Professional Tree Service will do everything to safeguard your home and property and is fully licensed and insured. Call them today at 401-823-7485 for a free estimate on tree service, tree removal, trimming, and tree care. That's 401-823-7585. Mike's Professional Tree Service are the tree experts serving all of Rhode Island. Online at mikesprotree.com. That's mikesprotree.com. Attention gardeners, farmers, growers, homesteaders, and horticulturalists. Coming soon to 1889 Post Road in Warwick, Rhode Island, it's The Grow Store. For all your indoor gardening supplies, it's The Grow Store. Midday Records is a label that is comprised of local artists and exists for the sole purpose of helping other local artists find new opportunities and to help build a more thriving New England music scene. Midday Records hosts the area's fastest-growing music-related networking event, the Midday Social, books Midday Records presents shows throughout New England, releases compilations featuring local music, promotes bands through the Midday blog, are the co-founders of Music for Pause, and has recently started an artist development and management division. Stay up to date with Midday Records by checking them out on your favorite social media site like Facebook and Twitter, and find them online at middayrecords.com. That's middayrecords.com.
And we're back. You're listening to the Coalition live on AM 790, your station for news and business. I am the PO taxpayer. This week, with 2 tuition payments, I'm particularly PO'd and particularly poor. We've got live in studio Dr. Dan Harrop, Republican nominee for the mayoralty of Providence. We've got Justice Bob Flanders. In addition, we've got Mike Riley, writer extraordinaire, R.I. Shrugs, Go Local Prov. Justice Flanders, you, in part of your private business now, you've actually helped establish a practice, if you will, surrounding municipal restructuring and municipal refinancing. A lot of folks made political hay about the fees. Class warfare is alive and well in Providence. There's not a real thorough understanding of the mechanics of running either a law firm or an accounting firm or anything that follows generally accepted accounting principles or actually has some level of professionalism. What's involved in managing a bankruptcy, even on the Central Falls level?
Well, it's extraordinary because you have to put together a team of experts. No one person is a bond expert, a labor lawyer, a municipal finance expert, an actuary. I had to assemble a team of experts who could address each of these problem areas, each one of which naturally needed to be engaged and fairly compensated. What folks have to remember about the Central Falls situation is this was the first time through. So there were a lot of expenses that won't be replicated in succeeding situations. We had to fight the Fiscal Stability Act, the law for receiverships, all the way to the state Supreme Court because Moreau and company challenged it. We had to engage lawyers to draft the statutes that became the laws of the state. There was a lot of litigation that I expect will not be repeated in the future. So And for all that said, I think the total cost approached $4 million to save $36 million.